doing something he had done hundreds of times before. He was listening to sperm whales. Sounds were what they had always been. Bursts of mechanical clicking, arriving in clusters, stopping, starting again, and had identified roughly 21 of them over decades of study. Scientific consensus on what those coders meant was settled, or seemed settled. Fixed signals, simple meanings, a contact call, a warning, an identifier for one clan versus another, a traffic light with 21 possible colors instead of 3, had become background texture, audio equivalent of a screensaver. His real work that day was about jellyfish. Then a woman walked past his open door, stopped, and turned back. Her name was Shafi Goldwasser. Cryptographers alive. On finding hidden structure inside systems that appeared, to any untrained eye, to be noise. She had spent decades cracking communication systems designed by human intelligence to conceal meaning. The entire direction of animal communication science. That sounds like Morse code. Have you tried using machine learning to decode it? Gruber had not. Nobody had. A door left open at the right moment. Goldwasser introduced Gruber to a third person, Michael Bronstein. That had recently begun to power large language models. Same foundational architecture driving systems like GPT, like Gemini, like Grok. Same approach that taught machines to predict the next word in a sentence. To that data, and you could apply those same tools to the problem. Who needed to meet to ask it had been working in separate fields. A hallway conversation changed that. It took 3 more years to build the infrastructure to answer it. In 2020, Project CETI was formally launched because founders believed they were doing something structurally identical, looking for intelligence operating on principles different from our own, listening to signals that might be more than noise, building a decoder for a language no human had ever spoken. 15 institutional partners, including Harvard, Oxford, MIT, and National Geographic Society. Biologists, roboticists, linguists, cryptographers, machine learning specialists, ethicists. Team understood. From the start, no single discipline could accomplish this alone. They chose their field site with precision, whose Dominica sperm whale project had been running since 2005. Jero knew individual animals in these clans by name. He had mapped their social hierarchies, documented family relationships, watched matriarchs age and calves grow. Something no AI model could build for itself. Context. A record of who these animals were and how they related to each other. That record was the critical ingredient transforming raw acoustic data into something potentially readable. Instrumentation the team designed went further than anything a whale study had previously attempted. Hydrophone arrays permanently deployed along migration routes, capable of isolating a single whale's voice from a group conversation. GPS coordinates, depth sensors, accelerometers tracking body position to within fractions of a degree, is happening in the acoustic space around it simultaneously. All of that context feeding into a single archive. All of it eventually feeding into the AI. Codas from sperm whale families in the Eastern Caribbean. 9,000 distinct acoustic events, each tagged with behavioral and environmental context. Of deep learning architecture underlying the most capable AI language models operating today. Which other words under which conditions? Applied now to click sequences of sperm whales. Results were published in Nature Communications in May 2024. Years of whale research had prepared anyone to expect. 21 codas did not hold. 4 distinct acoustic components: rhythm, tempo, rubato, and ornamentation. If those last 2 terms sound like music theory, that is not an accident. In the timing of notes that carry expressive meaning, ornamentation refers to additional clicks layered into a coda sequence in ways that modify its character. The AI found that sperm whales were not producing 21 fixed messages. They were producing messages by combining 4 underlying elements according to rules, the same fundamental architecture that underlies every human language. Daniela Rus, director of MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and one of the paper's lead researchers, described the finding plainly. Sperm whale communication, it turned out, was not random or simplistic, but structured in a very complex combinatorial manner. That sentence is more radical than it sounds. Combinatorial structure means the system can generate a theoretically unlimited number of distinct messages from a finite set of building blocks. The same way English builds hundreds of thousands of words from 44 basic sounds and billions of possible sentences from those words, the sperm whale phonetic alphabet produces a communication space with a generative capacity that researchers are only now beginning to map. But the finding that stopped researchers in a way, pure structural analysis did not come from the contextual data. The AI found that individual codas were not fixed. Their specific acoustic properties shifted depending on who was present in the conversation, what the previous speaker had just produced, and what the behavioral record showed was happening in that moment. The codas were context-sensitive in a precise, measurable way, not random variation. Systematic variation. The kind of variation that in human language is called pragmatics. The adjustment of what you say and how you say it in response to the specific communicative situation you are in. That distinction matters more than it might initially appear. A system that produces a fixed signal for a fixed meaning is not language. It is signaling. Every species on Earth communicates in signals. The question that has separated human language from every other form of animal communication is whether the system is generative, whether it can produce new meaning through the recombination of parts, and whether it is pragmatic, whether the producer adjusts what they say in response to the social and environmental context they are in. What the AI found in the sperm whale data, running through 9,000 codas, with the impartiality of a machine that had no investment in what it found, was evidence for both. Gruber said the researchers were finding the first building blocks of whale language. He was careful with that framing. Building blocks, not language itself, confirmed and fully decoded. The architecture of a system that has the properties of language, not a translated dictionary of whale words. The distinction is important, and the scientists involved have been consistent about maintaining it. What the AI mapped was structure. Meaning is the next step, and meaning requires a dataset orders of magnitude larger than 9,000 codas. The team's estimate for what full translation would require is in the hundreds of millions of codas, possibly billions. The recording infrastructure in Dominica is currently producing data continuously. The archive grows every week. The AI is running on every new edition. Alongside the structural analysis, another team within the project has been building something different. A generative model called WAM, Whale Acoustic Modeling, trained not just to analyze sperm whale clicks, but to produce them. WAM was built on the architecture of a music generation AI called VampNet, which had been designed to take fragments of a musical piece and predict what comes next with enough acoustic fidelity to sound convincingly continuous. The team trained it on sperm whale audio, alongside other animal vocalizations, until its output was indistinguishable from actual sperm whale clicks to human listeners. WAM's purpose is not translation in the direction of whale to human. It is a tool for potential playback studies. The ability to synthesize whale-like vocalizations and introduce them into real conversations among living animals to see how the animals respond. Not speaking whale. Producing sounds that whales might recognize as whale-like, with specific acoustic properties shaped by the structural rules. The AI has already mapped, and watching what happens. The project describes this as operating across a semantic gap, producing form without yet knowing content, because the meaning side of the equation remains the unsolved problem. What is not theoretical is what happened off the coast of Alaska in 2023, before the phonetic alphabet paper was published, in a study that has only recently received the attention it deserved. Dr. Brenda McCowan at the University of California, Davis, leads a team called Whale CETI, focused on using whale communication research as a template for developing tools that could eventually identify and respond to intelligent signals from non-human sources. The overlap with the extraterrestrial search is not casual. If you can build a framework for detecting and engaging with intelligence that operates on principles different from human cognition, that framework applies whether the intelligence is 300 meters offshore or 300 light years away. McCowan's team deployed an underwater speaker off the Alaskan coast and played a recorded humpback contact call, a greeting signal into the water. Within moments, a humpback whale they had been observing, an individual named Twain, turned towards the boat. For 20 minutes, Twain circled them. Every time they played the recording, Twain responded, not in random ways. The whale matched the intervals between each call they played, varying its own response timing in ways that matched the variations they introduced, as if adjusting to meet their conversational rhythm. When they lengthened the gap between playbacks, Twain lengthened its response interval. When they shortened it, Twain shortened. For 20 minutes, across a stretch of gray Alaskan water, a pattern of coordinated exchange held between a species that has been on this planet for 50 million years and a team of researchers who had only just figured out how to listen. McCowan's published conclusion was precise. This appears to be the first communicative exchange between humans, and humpback whales conducted in the humpback's own communication framework. Not humans calling out in human ways, and a whale responding to the noise. Humans using the whale's own acoustic grammar to initiate, and the whale recognizing it as an initiation and responding accordingly. The implications of what these two separate research threads have found, taken together, require a moment to fully absorb. For decades, the line separating human communication from every other form of animal signaling rested on a small number of properties. Generativity, the ability to produce new meaning from the recombination of parts. Displacement, the ability to communicate about things not immediately present in the environment, including the past, the future, and the abstract. Pragmatics, the adjustment of communication based on social context and the needs of specific recipients. These properties, linguists argued, were uniquely human. Not because the argument was airtight, but because no one had yet produced evidence that any other species possessed all of them. The sperm whale data is not producing a translation. It is not producing a dictionary. What it is producing is structural evidence that the communication system used by an animal with the largest brain on Earth, a brain 6 times the mass of a human brain, built across 30 million years of evolution, has the underlying architecture of a generative, context-sensitive, combinatorial system. The AI found that. Not a human analyst interpreting ambiguous patterns. An AI trained to find structure in data regardless of what structure it expected to find. What the field cannot yet answer, what the researchers themselves are careful not to claim, is whether that structure carries the kind of meaning that would constitute language in the fullest sense. Whether the content of those context-shifted codas corresponds to specific referential content, to ideas about things in the world. Whether a sperm whale mother, clicking a specific sequence at a specific rhythm to a specific calf, is transmitting information, emotion, instruction, memory. Whether any of it reaches across the gap that separates signal from sentence. But here is what the structure alone is already forcing the field to confront. If a communication system has combinatorial, context-sensitive, generative structure, if it operates by rules that allow a finite set of elements to produce an unlimited range of outputs calibrated to specific social situations, the burden of proof has shifted. The question is no longer whether sperm whales might have something resembling language. The question is what we mean when we say language, and whether we defined it the way we defined it because it was accurate or because it was convenient. There is a word for the moment when evidence forces a reclassification of a category that previously felt stable. Researchers use it carefully and sparingly because the word itself carries consequences. That word is paradigm. And what Project CETI has produced, in the space of 4 years, moving from a hallway conversation to a peer-reviewed paper in one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals, is the beginning of a paradigm shift in how science understands the distribution of cognitive complexity on this planet. The legal scholars at NYU's More Than Human Life program are already asking the next question, the one the scientists are not yet ready to answer. If sperm whales communicate through a system with the structural properties of language, if they transmit meaning to specific recipients in context-adjusted ways across multi-generational social structures, what does that imply about their legal standing? The question is not rhetorical. It is a practical inquiry being pursued by actual lawyers, funded by actual institutions, in anticipation of findings that have not yet arrived, but that the structural evidence suggests are coming. Legal personhood has never been extended to a non-human species, but no non-human species has ever produced this kind of structural evidence. Both of those facts are true simultaneously, and the tension between them is where the next decade of this conversation will live. The ocean absorbs sound differently than air. A sperm whale's click can travel hundreds of kilometers in the right conditions, bent and channeled by temperature gradients deep in the water column. A family separated by a distance that would make communication impossible on land can be acoustically present to each other in ways no terrestrial species can replicate. The communication system these animals developed across 30 million years of evolution did not develop in the dark. It developed in an environment where sound is the primary carrier of the world, where knowing the acoustic landscape is knowing the world itself, where the capacity to produce and interpret complex structured sound is not a cognitive luxury, but the operational center of survival and social life. The AI that found structure in 9,000 coders was not told what to look for. It was given data and asked to find patterns. It found patterns that matched the defining architectural properties of human language, emerging from an animal that shares no recent common ancestor with humans, that developed its cognitive and communicative capacities in an environment that shares almost nothing with the conditions that shaped human intelligence. That is convergent evolution in a domain that was previously considered uniquely human. Two separate lineages, two completely different evolutionary pressures, two completely different sensory environments. The same underlying architecture for structured, generative, context-sensitive communication emerging in both. Consider what that means in biological terms. Convergent evolution is not unusual. Wings evolved independently in birds, bats, and insects. Eyes evolved independently in vertebrates and cephalopods. Camera lens eyes and compound eyes solved the same problem, collecting and focusing light through entirely different mechanical approaches. When two lineages converge on the same solution, it tells you something important. That solution is not arbitrary. It is optimal. It is what intelligence, operating under sufficient selective pressure in an information-rich environment, tends to arrive at. If vowels evolved independently in sperm whales, if combinatorial, context-sensitive phonetic structure emerged in a creature that shares no common ancestor with modern humans within the last 60 million years, developing that structure in pitch darkness under thousands of meters of water pressure, using sonic clicks produced by a specialized organ in its enormous head rather than a larynx, the only conclusion available to honest science is that this architecture is not a human invention. It is a property of intelligence itself, a feature that emerges when a sufficiently large brain, embedded in a sufficiently complex social environment, faces sufficiently strong pressure to transmit nuanced information across distance and time. We did not invent language. We discovered it. And something else discovered it too, long before we arrived, in an ocean we have barely begun to understand. The AI is still running. The archive in Dominica grows continuously. The structural map of the sperm whale phonetic alphabet is being extended with every new coda logged. Somewhere in the data that has not yet been analyzed, there may be the first correlation strong enough to move from structure to meaning. A specific coda sequence tied reliably to a specific behavioral state, a specific environmental context, a specific social relationship. When that correlation is found and verified and replicated across enough data to be statistically unambiguous, it will be the first word. Not a translation, not a conversation. One word. A single confirmed unit of meaning extracted from 30 million years of communication that humans have been present for without being able to hear. What happens after that first word is a question nobody currently knows how to answer. The matriarch of the clan that Gero has been observing in Dominica since 2005 has been communicating with her family for every day of those 2 decades. Whatever she has said across 20 years of recorded acoustic exchange, whatever she has told the young ones, whatever she communicates about the deep water hunting routes, Whatever she produces in the long exchanges that the biologging tags record as multi-party conversations lasting up to an hour is inside the archive, stored, waiting. The AI is learning to read it. What it says when it finally can, and what that requires us to believe about the nature of mind and the distribution of intelligence on this planet, is the question that nobody in that Dominica research station is in a hurry to answer before the evidence is strong enough to answer it honestly. But the door that Shafi Goldwasser walked past in 2017 is not going to close again. The hallway conversation happened. The machine found structure that was not supposed to be there. The humpback named Twain circled the boat for 20 minutes, matching intervals with a team of researchers who had finally, after 50 million years of separation, found a way to knock. The whales have been talking. The question that will define the next decade of this science, and possibly the next century of how humans understand their place among the minds of this planet, is deceptively simple. What have they been saying?